All right, and it looks like we are live. So, hello, everybody who is here and anybody who joins us later. Anna, if you want to go and introduce yourself first.
Yeah, so my name's Anna. I'm an OCD and mental health advocate on Instagram. And on there, I just share my personal story and experience with OCD. I recently completed an intensive ERP program just a couple of months ago that I began at the beginning of the pandemic. And I've had OCD for majority of my life. So I love chatting with others and answering questions about it.
Yeah. And I am Molly, and I work for OCD as a peer advisor. So when members, I'm going to try to move my camera because this picture behind my head is kind of distracting. So when there we go. When members join when they join OCD and they start going to therapy sessions with their ERP specialist, they get assigned a peer advisor. So it is somebody who has been through an OCD's program, who has OCD, who has some of the same or had some of the same questions or concerns. So that is my role within OCD. And I also, that is how I met Anna, is through advocating on Instagram and just sharing our stories, sharing our experiences. And it's always so amazing to talk to other people who get it. And we were doing these lives on Thursdays in June. And that is, tonight is the last one for us. So it's been so fun. I love, Darla, I see your question, or not even your question, just your comment about, we're talking, we were talking before this started about how OCD can hold us back. And so we are so happy that you're able to do the things that are fun and that give you enjoyment.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, and that you took the step to just go out and just try. Just go out and try to be with others and do something that you really enjoy. And that's really amazing.
Awesome. And I do see some questions. So Jared asked, I'm terrified to work out. I'm 34, 6'3", and I'm overweight. It's almost as if I have forgotten how to work out. I'm scared my heart will stop, and I feel and analyze every feeling. Help. What do you think, Anna?
I mean, I definitely have the same fear. Like doing anything that I feel like doing, especially with OCD, I feel like if you do anything that's pushing your limits or pushing your boundaries and it's really challenging yourself, I feel like OCD immediately will latch onto that and be like, oh, excellent, this is another thing that I can go and run with. And so I think like just still go and do it. Push through it. If you're feeling that anxiety or you're feeling that like that rush of like your heart and you're just like unsure of what's going on, just keep pushing through, because I know Molly and I have said this previously, but it's not anxiety that's going to kill you. It's not going to be the end all of what you're doing. So just go out and try anyways.
Yeah. And I would say in terms of working out, start small. If cardio and getting your heart racing is something that it feels a little bit too overwhelming right now, start with, walking or biking or something that is not as high intense. And that's because I know that feeling when it feels like your heart's going to explode. And like Anna was saying, it's not, and your anxiety around that is not going to be, is not going to hurt you, even if it feels like it will.
Yes.
So I would say, just get out there, try to do what you can, and being aware of those feelings and analyzing those, or I shouldn't say analyzing, but being aware of those feelings, I think is okay and is a part of it.
Totally. Yeah, just acknowledging how you're feeling and that it's okay to feel that way.
Mm-hmm. How do I do ERP for social anxiety OCD? I think my friends think I'm a bad person because I have weird eye contact. So Bella, as somebody who also has social anxiety, ERP is kind of like what we say in other lives as well. ERP is the same for treating OCD. So social anxiety, if you're anxious that it sounds like you have some anxiety around your friends thinking you're a bad person because of your eye contact. So go out and hang out with your friends and do the things that your OCD is trying to hold you back from doing. Of course, it's so much easier said than done, but I think exposing yourself to those situations and intentionally allowing that anxiety to be there and to just kind of sit with those feelings, because at the end of the day, we don't know what our friends feel about us. We can't know what other people are thinking. And if we spend the entire time hanging out with them, trying to figure out what they're thinking, we are going to miss out on all that fun that we can possibly have with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the most important thing, is trying to stay as present as you can while you're out with your friends. I know it's a lot easier said than, or a lot harder than me. I cannot speak. Oh my goodness. It's easier said than done. Wow. But yeah, just like going out and just, even like if that thought comes up and you're feeling like nervous and anxious about it, just acknowledging that, hey, I'm having this thought, my friends might think that I'm bad, and just carrying on, because like OCD and anxiety will always be there, but the times that you can spend with friends and going out and being with family might not always be available, right? So yeah, picking what you value and love over it.
Yeah. Can I practice ERP without a therapist? I'm having a hard time finding one that takes my insurance that's a specialist. How do I know OCD is real and it's not me?
Well, I know that we've said this in previous lives, that if questions start with how do I know, what if, could it be, not like, it's usually OCD trying to get in. I think like, I'm just because I haven't done an OCD personally, but I think an OCD is pretty easy to sign up with specialists, right?
Yeah, and we do accept a lot of insurances, and I do know a lot of times that insurance providers can do like reimbursement if they're out of network. So it's definitely something to check in with your insurance provider. But I think practicing ERP without a therapist can get kind of tricky, just because they know. It's such a weird thing, because you, of course, know yourself best and what triggers you, but they can get so much more creative, I think, than the typical person can. And that's really necessary, because OCD is very creative. So we need to find very creative ways to kind of push back on it. So I would say, if you're not able to afford or find a therapist, we do have support groups. And I know a lot of times people talk about different support groups that are on Facebook as well. So I would say that is probably a cheaper or free resource to be able to utilize.
Yeah, I think support groups are a really great tool to use.
My mouse is doing its thing again. I get so anxious when an intrusive thought comes in my head and I don't overreact or get as anxious. Then OCD says this proves your blank. Yeah, and that is what is sometimes referred to as the backdoor spike, and the fact that you're not getting anxious about, you're getting anxious about the fact that you're not getting anxious.
Yeah.
And that's, as weird as it sounds, Emily, it's actually a good thing. It means that you have made progress, and it means that you are kind of getting through some of that anxiety.
Yeah, and OCD makes no sense. It really, it literally will latch onto and take over and make you think the weirdest things sometimes. And yeah, that's a completely normal thing with OCD.
Yeah. And I think the then OCD says this proves, that sounds like a compulsion to me, trying to prove or disprove or use logic on OCD thoughts is just not going to get us anywhere, to be honest.
Yeah, that's definitely a great time to practice ERP and mindfulness. Acknowledge the thought, hear what OCD is saying, and just carry on with what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have HOCD, and I used to have clear signs of distress, but now there is no distress. Does that mean it's still OCD? Excuse me. So that it sounds like similar to what Emily was just asking. That not having distress about it is now causing some distress. And the answer that you don't want is that we don't know. You don't know if it's OCD. We can't know that necessarily. And it's, just use the tools that you do have in your tool belt when those distress signals do come up.
Yeah. And OCD can also jump around to lots of different themes and topics too. So sometimes you'll have one that is really, really distressing, and then you might notice it going down, but something else might be going on. And I think that's just a really easy way for OCD to try to get us back into its loop of believing and following the thoughts that we're having.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we say whatever the OCD is latching onto is kind of irrelevant. So in this case, you have HOCD, it could be, POCD or harm thoughts or anything. It doesn't really matter to your OCD. It's just kind of trying to find anything. It's like grasping at straws of just trying to find something that upsets you, honestly.
Yeah.
So Jackie has asked, my son has OCD. How do I best support him?
We were actually talking about this just before we started the live and talking about how great it is that parents and any caregivers or family members are reaching out when their children are being diagnosed with OCD and trying to find support. And we were saying that the best first step is getting support for them. So talking to a therapist, getting them diagnosed, finding someone in your area that does ERP or is an OCD specialist, and then just being there with them and supporting them, because the beginning ERP is really, really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, the fact that you're here, Jackie, means you're probably taking other steps to support him as well. And that's huge. That, just being physically there for him is really, really does matter. And as hard as it is to do in the moment, but giving in to his compulsions in the long run is detrimental to him. And I would say, so trying to kind of figure out what his compulsions are and work with him to get through them together. I think it's really important to recognize that you and him are on the same team, because OCD really does kind of change our emotions and our behaviors and a lot of things. So I would say, just being there with him and for him is huge.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people, even my therapist has said this, that OCD, it's one individual in a family can be diagnosed with it, but it is also a family disorder at the end of the day, because whatever it is that's affecting the one person who's diagnosed, whatever's happening with them is still affecting everyone else in the household too. So I think even just practicing, just being aware that it can affect you and other members in your family too, and trying to reach out and get supports for you guys as well, because it can be really, really hard to support a loved one with OCD and kind of sometimes feel like you can't do much because we can't turn our brains off and we can't stop the thoughts from appearing in our brain. And when you're really young, it can be really, really distressing for others in the family.
Yeah. And I do know that OCD has support groups for, it's not specifically for parents, but it is for loved ones of those with OCD. So I would say definitely check those out if you're able, because they are just to support other people have, similar experiences. And it's always nice to just chat with others who have, who are going through it as well.
Absolutely.
So is this the last live for both of you, Aaliyah? I think it is. We, want to accept the uncertainty that it might be a thing again in the future, but for now, somebody else fabulous will be taking this spot, and we'll just kind of go back to watching them instead of being in them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any information on religion OCD?
Yeah, so I struggled with this when I was younger. I was a part of a very religious family, and I had a really hard time accepting that I had OCD, because that's just how my brain was, and not realize. And instead of my brain wanted to accept that I had it because I wasn't religious enough and I wasn't participating in my church. But just like we said earlier, there's only one way to treat all different things of OCD, which is ERP. So no matter what the content of your thoughts are, what the things you're experiencing, ERP is still what's best. What's best to practice. So reaching out to a therapist and trying to get some support from them, and also finding different support groups too to chat about, because it can become really, really difficult when OCD starts to kind of tear apart things that are really important to you and things that you value and believe in.
And I think that, just how you were describing that is exactly why your OCD latches onto those things, because it is something you value, it is something you care about, and that is why. I was having that conversation with my partner the other day, because we were talking about religious OCD, and I was saying it makes so much sense that my OCD has never latched on to my religion, because it's not a really big part of my life. It's not, something that I necessarily identify with. And it's just so interesting that, like, of course, that's why it hasn't latched onto it, because I don't, care as much about it. So it is so interesting that, because you are, I assume, a religious person and religion means something to you, that's why the OCD, wants to get in there.
Yeah, and I would say keep practicing what you're practicing, even though OCD is wanting you to, maybe it wants you to stop or wants to do more. Just keep going. If you go to church or you attend different, like a different way, different method, like go for it. Keep attending, keep practicing. Yeah. Don't let OCD take it over from you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so Bella, I don't want to speak for a therapist. I would say get your son in to see a therapist if you are able. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it said my son. I am so sorry. I misread that. But again, as you know, we are not clinicians, and I don't want to give any clinical advice. So I would say try to find a therapist who is able to. I know there are therapists who work with addiction as well as OCD. So
yeah, they go hand in hand for a lot of people. And I would say what exactly you said here. Say that exactly to a therapist or someone that you're trying to talk to find more supports.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Daisy said, I currently have TOCD. I'm currently very anxious. I don't know what to do. It's hard. I've been like that for a few weeks now. So I am assuming that means trans OCD. That is my thought.
That was my thought too.
Okay. Daisy, if you want to give us a little bit more background. If not, we'll just kind of go on that assumption. It is very hard, and it is, there is no magic cure for getting through this or getting over it, if you will. I would say I'm trying to think of how to not give reassurance, but just knowing who you are is important. And thank you for the clarification. If you are able to see a therapist for that, I would say that would be a great step. OCD is OCD. So the fact that it has latched onto your gender identity is just, I don't mean to minimize it, but it is just another form of OCD, and it's all, exposures and preventing that response is really what's going to get you through it.
And then also just like realizing and accepting that it's okay to be anxious. There's nothing wrong with the anxiety that you're feeling. The anxiety is not going to change you. It's not going to make you a different person. It's okay to sit with those feelings. And the longer you sit with and accept it, the easier it becomes to acknowledge and move on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Yeah, that the anxiety itself isn't the problem even. It can hold us back, but that's the choice that we're making based off of the anxiety. It's not actually the anxiety doing that for us. I like that. That's hard. It's so hard when you're in it, though, to recognize that.
Yeah, and especially when it's been a long period of time, it's really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Saeed asked, how can I overcome groinal response? So
hater response.
I was going to say there's not, you don't want to overcome it.
Yeah.
As hard as that is to accept, it is, again, just accepting that it exists, that it's there. And I know groinal response isn't talked about that often. So for anybody who is listening, who is curious about what that is, it's basically when you have a sensation down there, and it's, it can be in reaction to something that is, what you would say is, I was going to say the opposite, but it can be in reaction to something that you don't want it to be. And that's when it is so scary, and that's when it feels so real. And I know, linked often with pedophilia OCD it's that fear of, well, if my body reacted that way, does that mean I am? Or, or somebody of the same sex or somebody of the opposite sex, whatever it is. And it's so scary because it is, a physiological reaction that your body did do. But it is just a physiological reaction. And as, the fact that we assign meaning to it and that we put this value on it is the problem, not the actual response, if that makes sense.
I was going to say that too. And we can't control how our body responds and reacts to things either. So the more we worry about it and stress about it and become more aware of it, the harder it is for us to carry on with what we're doing, because at the back of our mind, we're constantly thinking about, okay, how am I going to respond? How is my body going to react? And it just makes it really, really difficult to carry on with anything during your day.
Absolutely. Yeah. I heard I think it was a podcast once talked about how like our bodies do so much for us.
Yeah.
And we, unless we are somebody who has somatic OCD, we don't ever think about our heart beating or our blood moving throughout our body or our lungs breathing for us. They're just all kind of part of living, and we don't need to assign any meaning to it. We don't need to assign anything to it. And the groinal response is just another body, just another reaction that our body does sometimes. So yeah, just accepting that it's there, that it happened. And like Anna was saying, trying to still go about our day without, really putting too much thought into it.
Absolutely. Great questions.
Yeah, I'm trying to see. Okay. So Mia asked, I have severe OCD and kept having intrusive thoughts with my eyes closed. How do you deal with the uncertainty that you didn't follow through with your thoughts?
That's a really great question. I think the number one is that we'll never know, right? We'll never be able to fully know if we did or didn't do something. And so it is hard to sit with that uncertainty and to accept that we don't know, but just reminding yourself, like answering the question, like maybe I did do this, maybe I didn't do that, I don't know. And then just refocusing to what you're doing, and not trying to assign meaning or ruminate about what you did or didn't do.
Yeah. And I see below that she wrote that she is working with a therapist. So
awesome.
I think that's great. That's, it's a really good question to bring up for sure with them. But yeah, what Anna said is probably what they're going to say too.
Yeah. It's not the answer you want to hear, but it'll become easier over time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I started ERP today about schizophrenia, OCD, and it left me so triggered and scared. We watched a video about a lady with schizophrenia. It triggered my existential theme too. Advice. I love your clap for them.
I get so excited when people are like, I started ERP today, or I just reached out to a therapist, because that's huge. That's like one of the biggest things, like one of the biggest steps you can do. Like I know for me personally, knowing that I needed to start therapy and reaching out to a therapist to start an ERP program was one of the scariest things I've ever had to do, because I had to tell this person what I was thinking and things that I was doing, and it was really personal. So I commend you. That's huge. And this might not sound nice, but it's great that you watched it and you were anxious and triggered and scared, because that's what we want to do with ERP. We want to face our fears. We want to make ourselves uncomfortable and learn how to sit with those feelings and how to tolerate the anxiety and the uncertainty with what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's really common too at the beginning of ERP to do like one exposure, like be exposed to something, and then it triggers so many other things, because your brain is like, okay, well, you're doing this to try to stop, like you don't want to do a compulsion, so now I'm going to try doing this to get your attention and be even louder and see if this helps maybe. And so your brain's just going to fire a lot to try to get your attention. But
yeah, everything you said, that's the point really of going to therapy, is to trigger yourself. And it's hard and it is scary, but you're here, and you, I assume, are going back to your next session, and that's so big. And yeah, like you said, just reaching out and saying like, I need help with this, is huge. Like that is such a big step already. And you should, I think, I don't want to say you should feel a certain way, but I am proud of you. And I think it's, it's amazing that you're working on yourself, and knowing that other themes might get triggered along the way, is part of the process as well.
Yeah, sure is.
Yeah, love is an open door. I love it. ROCD and questioning if your family and friends really like you. Yeah.
Yeah, relationship OCD, I think a lot of the time people get like just associate that with like intimate partners that you have. But relationship OCD can and will affect any relationship you have, whether it's with people, friends, partners, family members, pets, like really anyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think questioning if your family and friends really like you is really hard. I know Anna and I've talked about this like on a very personal basis when we were little, that we would be that person that would be like, do you still like me? Are you still friends with me? Like, can we still be friends tomorrow? And as kids, you can kind of get away with some things like that. But then as adults, like that's really frustrating for other people to deal with too. So I think, accepting that we don't know how other people feel. We can't know that. All we can do is be ourselves, hope for the best, and again, still do the things that we want to do, even with that fear of maybe they don't like me.
Yeah, and I think this was one thing that I learned in therapy too, that it was really difficult to accept at the beginning. But no matter what you do, there will always be people out there that just don't like you or don't mesh with you or don't want to do things with you, and that was really hard for my OCD to for me to accept and to understand. But I think that's another part, once you kind of realize that no matter what OCD tells you to do, you can't change other people's minds.
Yeah. And I think, because with something like that, it seems like the compulsion would probably be reassurance. And OCD is never going to be satisfied. So no matter how many times you ask them, do you still like me? Are we still friends? And they answer yes every single time, you're going to want it one more time. And that's, no matter what you do, OCD will not be, I'm married and I still am like, do you actually like me? Are you my friend? Like, it's not. Yeah. How can I overcome catastrophizing?
Is it like in a specific situation or just like generalized catastrophizing everything? Because I feel like even then, like you just have to sit with the uncertainty that everything might crumble and go wrong and nothing will ever go right and everything's going to explode. But yeah, you have to sit with like, maybe it will happen and maybe it won't. And maybe just starting with a small thing that you notice throughout your day, maybe like the time you get up or the way you drive to work or whatever it might be. Just starting with one thing and sitting with the uncertainty about not knowing what the outcome of that situation will be.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point to recognize that everybody, whether or not they have OCD, deals with uncertainty, in the sense that, when somebody is driving to work, they don't know that the car in front of them is going to be safe and it's not going to get them into a car accident. You just can't know that. You don't know that your, floor is not going to give out from under you in a minute. We can't know those things. We're not, for future fortune tellers. But everybody deals with that uncertainty. That's not specific to people with anxiety or OCD. So, and I think, recognizing that other people are able to go through their days, even with that uncertainty, can be helpful because it reminds us that we are, that our brains get latched onto things, but it does not mean that it's more likely to happen. And that's, it's hard though because I think catastrophizing everything just kind of snowballs and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So it is hard to pull yourself out of that.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that.
What is some advice you would give to somebody beginning ERP dealing with contamination OCD? I'll let you take that one because I know that's what you deal with a little bit more.
Yeah, so contamination OCD is really hard. I feel like, especially during the pandemic, I feel like it's just heightened everything a little bit. But congratulations for beginning ERP. It's very exciting. I'll do my clap again. But I think my biggest piece of advice is just whatever you and your therapist have talked about, whatever plan you've put into action or whatever exposure you've decided that is going to be your exposure for whatever length of time is before you see each other again, practice it and do it all the time and expose yourself all the time to it. It's hard and it's really uncomfortable, but just push yourself and just continue doing it. It's not the best advice, but it's hard because when you first start ERP, I'm even like for me, I was like, okay, I'll just do this once a day and then I'll be fine. And my therapist was like, no, like do it multiple times a day because you can do it once and then that's just one small fragment of your entire day. But then OCD still has like this much of your day. So try to do things as often as you can and expose yourself and put yourself in uncomfortable situations and just push your way through. And once you start doing that, it gets easier down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say to be as open as you can with your therapist, because if you are holding something back in terms of what you have and have not done with your exposures, it's not going to help in the long run. So even if you did not do what you were assigned, I don't use the word assigned, but, kind of told to do from the last session, that's okay. You're learning, you're practicing. And I think just telling them that is more beneficial in the long run than not, because it will alter your treatment plan, to be honest.
Yeah. And also just giving yourself like some grace and compassion because OCD is hard, but trying to fight back with it, especially at the beginning, it's hard and it's really exhausting and it's an emotional roller coaster. So there may be some days you're like, yeah, I can do everything and I'm on top of the world and I'm unstoppable. And then the next day you're like, no, I'm not even going to step foot like near my kitchen or outside. Right. So just knowing that it's okay to go through different emotions and that you're trying your hardest and that's the best you can do.
Yeah. You can't get there without doing it and pushing through. So I'm just excited for you, Matt, to be in therapy and to be going through this. I started ERP recently and it's been hard but helpful. Mine deals with mental praying in response. However, now they are trying to change my prayers in general, not in response. Is this normal? I am not entirely sure what.
I think, like, are you meaning your therapist is wanting you to change the type of prayer that you're doing, versus like the response you're giving to your prayer?
Okay, I didn't know. Yeah, I wasn't sure if that meant like OCD is trying to change your prayers. So Jenny, if you're able to give us a little bit more info. But I would say, as we say in all of our lives, is this normal? Yeah, it is. It is probably just a part of the process. If your OCD is changing, if it's morphing, I heard somebody today call it a shapeshifter, and I was like, that is perfect. Because it will weasel its way in where it's not welcome. So it changing is definitely can definitely be normal. Is ERP successful in children? That's a really good question. Yeah. It is. Yeah, it is. It's very different in terms of how to approach their exposures, but it is definitely something that can be successful. Yeah, I would say just finding a therapist who has worked with children before, if you're able to, because they do need to approach the exposures differently. And a lot of times kids don't know necessarily that they're dealing with OCD or that they're even struggling because it's just kind of what they're used to. So, but yes, it definitely can be successful. And I think the earlier a child or a person is able to start this type of therapy, the better, and the longer the results can be, I guess. Yeah. Does harm OCD relate with your fear? Yeah.
Like OCD will relate itself to anything and everything possible. Like anything that's involved in your life or that you enjoy or that you think about, OCD will be like, oh, this is a great thought. I'm going to latch onto this now. Or I don't know. I think OCD is also really creative just in the way that sometimes I can do something literally once and it'll be like 2 or 3 minutes of me doing something. And then a few days later, OCD is like, oh, so remember that thing you did? Now we're just going to throw it at you again.
Yeah.
It can relate to anything.
Yeah, I remember somebody had asked us about like happy events and like joyous occasions and being really frustrated that their OCD was there that day. And it's, it is going to come along for the ride anywhere it can. So it finding your worst fear and throwing it at you is the name of the game, unfortunately. My OCD has me depressed and paralyzed. What are some ways to push through the day?
Well, I'm sending you a lot of love, because it's really hard, especially when OCD just completely knocks you out like that and really takes everything away from you. So I'm really sorry that you're experiencing that and dealing with that right now, because it's hard. And it's hard too, because OCD can, you never know when it's going to happen, right? Like sometimes just with the content of our thoughts or the amount of times we need to do things, it's really, really overwhelming, especially if you don't know someone else maybe who experiences it to chat with. Yeah.
I think some things that I like to do when I am feeling really overwhelmed is get outside. I know it's not, a be all end all by any means, but it can kind of just pull you out of your present moment and just see other living things. For some reason, always just kind of brings me back to reality because you can see the bugs and you can smell things, you can feel the breeze. So that if that's something you're able to do, of course, maybe just take a walk outside, just, sit outside, honestly, put your feet in the dirt, something like that, I think can be helpful.
Yeah, something that I like to do, it's kind of like two things. I'll either pick one really random thing that I'm going to do. So I'm going to get up and brush my hair, or I'm going to change my pajamas, I'm going to go get a snack, like just one thing. And I find that once you get up and you do that one thing, you're like, okay, I've done this. I've proved to myself I can do this. So what's one more thing I can do? Or setting a timer for a little amount of time, just trying to make sure it doesn't become compulsive, but setting a timer for 10 or 15 minutes. And just like you said, Molly, like going outside or reading a book or watching a TV show, just something and outside of the environment that you're spending a lot of your time into. I find that really, really helps.
And I think sometimes our brain takes a little bit longer to catch up to our body. So finding something that you really enjoy, even if right now it does not feel enjoyable. For example, reading a book or taking a shower or something that does bring you peace or joy, do it anyway, even if right now you're feeling like it's not going to help. Kind of exposing yourself to that thing, to that activity, and then letting your brain kind of catch up, I think can be helpful too.
Yes, absolutely. And if you're able to reach out to like a therapist or any other supports, I would really suggest that too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Is it possible to have most of the OCDs from the checklist? And is the therapist going to work on each one separately?
Yeah, so you can have, it really depends for each person. It just depends on the severity of how much time it's taking out of your day too. So that's some therapists will look at. And then like as far as it goes for working on things, it really depends on the plan that you and your therapist come up with, and the way that your therapist like practices ERP. So some people, I know that Molly, I think we did very similar, where we had a fear hierarchy. So I talked to my therapist about my intrusive thoughts and things that I was doing, and then I ranked how different situations made me feel. So we kind of targeted multiple different things at once. But some therapists might kind of break them into different chunks. It just really depends on how they practice ERP.
Yeah, I think I think when you say most from the checklist, I think, do you mean like certain different subtypes? Because in that case, yes, absolutely. To have, some intrusive thoughts in this one area and then some intrusive thoughts in a different area is definitely pretty common. And it just kind of depends on how the therapist wants to tackle them. Yeah, like Anna said.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking the time, of course. I'm so glad.
All day with false memory. This morning I was wondering if I did something wrong, but can't remember at all what I did this morning. Yeah, that is very common to be completely unsure of something you might have done or not done, something you thought of, not sure if you've acted on it. And it's really hard, but just sitting with the uncertainty that I don't know. I really don't know if I did this. Maybe I did it, maybe I didn't. But right now I'm going to go outside or I'm watching a show with my friends. I've got more important things to worry about than something that happened 8 or 9 hours ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's not the answer. Again, they're probably hoping for, but yeah, it's true. Just accepting that maybe you did is kind of the only way to get through it, I think.
Yeah.
Mark. So Mark said, I've lost all affection to my girlfriend, although I find her attractive. I find myself wanting to be with someone else rather than her, and genuinely can't tell if I like her. I don't know how love is supposed to feel.
Well, one, I think love feels differently for everybody, so it's really hard to even have like a textbook definition of what it will look like or what it won't look like. Which again, not the answer you're wanting, but yeah, that's really hard.
It is, yeah, and I think how love is supposed to feel, there isn't really a way that it is supposed to feel. It is so different for everybody. So, not to provide you with reassurance because we don't know your relationship, but yeah, just keep going through your days. If things are, going the way that they are meant, I'm trying to think of how to word this. Yeah, and I would say be open with her if you can, if you have that type of relationship where you can share these thoughts, because she knows you best. So I would say just try to be open with her.
I think what you're trying to say is that relationships, there's so much uncertainty with relationships. Like we can't predict what could or couldn't happen. We aren't sure like what a long term or like what the long run of something looks like. So just kind of like day to day, just keep going at it and doing what you do. And having open communication. And if you're able to reach out to an OCD specialist or ERP therapist, chatting with them to kind of maybe see if there's something else that they can support you with.
Yes, thank you for saying much better what I have to say.
It's a really tricky thing to figure out.
Yes, I will try. That is all I can do.
Yes, exactly.
I went and visited my grandma and cousin and her baby despite my ROCD. I love that.
Awesome.
That's that is progress. That is a success. That is a win. Celebrate it. That's amazing. I love that despite my ROCD, because you did.
And I think also just like reminding yourself of that. So maybe the next time you're in a really tough situation, being like, you know what? When my OCD or something was really hard, I was able to go out and see these other people, even though OCD was really screaming in my ears. So remember that for next time too. It really helps.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Christy, I'm going to skip yours for just one sec because this was a follow-up. So I was asking about when I say the Rosary at night or at Mass, my therapist is trying to change them to a one-line prayer. Okay. Feels wrong, like changing relationship with God. Okay, gotcha.
Right. Yeah, so like what we had said before, I mean, your faith and religion is, you determine how much you put into your faith and religion. And I don't think changing the way that your prayer is said is going to change your relationship with God, right? So it might feel wrong and feel really bad, but just remembering what your like vision of relationship with God is and keeping that in the back of your mind.
Yeah, I think you said that perfectly. Because you get to determine what that relationship is and what it should look like. So
and it'll be uncomfortable and really hard for a while, but I think you'll be able to work through it.
My 17-year-old daughter is struggling and won't engage in therapy and doing her exposure work with her therapist. She feels shame for her OCD. How do I help her?
I think it's extremely common to feel shame with OCD because it's really hard to accept that we're having the content of thoughts that we're having at the frequency that we're having them. And we have zero control over it. We don't get to control when it pops up, where, the content of it. So it's really hard to not feel ashamed sometimes of what we're thinking and what we're going through, right? And so I think just supporting your daughter from there, like letting her know that it's okay. There's a really great community. Like there's really great OCD support groups. There's really great accounts on Instagram. There's Facebook groups you can join. There's just a really great OCD community that maybe you can have her reach out to, and just so she feels a little bit less alone and knows that there are other people out here we feel the same thing she feels, and we understand how difficult it can be, and
Mm-hmm.
that might help too.
Yeah, and I would say even just if you can just share videos like this or
Yes.
other webinars that we host or that other people host, because it is, I think so much of that shame is, you know, speaking from my own experience, is it feels like you're the only one who is going
Yes.
through it. And I think even if she's not comfortable opening up or sharing her own story, just hearing other people's stories can be really fulfilling and make you feel much less isolated. So I would say that's probably a good place to start, is just kind of showing her that there are other people that exist, you know, that have those thoughts and that have those experiences.
Yeah. And this might not, like Christy, you might not want to hear this, but I feel like with ERP, because it is so personal, sometimes people just aren't ready to do it. They're not at a place where they're ready to tackle what's going on with them. They don't feel like they're in a great spot. So it might even just be a time where your daughter's just like, it's just not right for her to be doing it right now.
Yeah, because
it's really hard.
If you, for lack of a better word, force someone into therapy, they're going to resist, and that's you know, anybody, let alone a 17-year-old that is, you know, probably going through a lot of other transitions just in her life in general. So I would say, allowing her to know when she's ready. You know, maybe reminding her of what her OCD has taken from her, because I know that's something I leaned on a lot when I was really struggling, is you know, reminding myself why I was doing this in the first place. And if she has some solid reasons as to why she wants to get better, that might be something to kind of rely on.
Yeah, absolutely.
I need coping. Where do I find my own support group? Okay, so so we, within OCD, we do have support groups for loved ones that have loved ones of those with OCD. So they're not, as of now, they're not specifically tailored to parents, but they are for caregivers and others who live with, or, you know, kind of deal on a regular basis with somebody who has OCD. So I would say check those out if you're able to, Christy. And I know, so Natasha Daniels does, I think the website started as just anxious toddlers, and it's now transitioned into anxious teenagers or toddlers to teenagers.
Yeah, I think if you search her name on Google, it comes up as like the first search.
Yes. And her children have OCD. I think some of them might just have anxiety, but some of them do have OCD. And I would say check out her page. I know she has support groups as well, specifically for parents of children that have OCD.
Yeah, she has really great resources.
Yeah.
That's a good suggestion.
Yeah. Stephen asked, I have taboo thoughts. I am afraid to see my mother because I feel like it's triggering me, my mind telling me that I might have fallen in love with her, and it's really distressing. Yeah.
That's really hard and uncomfortable, and it's hard too that it's pushing you away from wanting to see your mom and have that relationship with her, just because it is so triggering and so upsetting. If you are able to reach out to someone for support, like an OCD or ERP specialist, I would for sure. But then also, like what we said earlier, just accepting that we don't know, and we don't have control over how our body responds and reacts to thoughts that we have.
And I think the part where you say my mind telling me, you know, our mind can tell us all kinds of things that aren't true. My mind could tell me that I am, I don't mean to diminish what you're experiencing, Stephen, but your mind can tell you anything. And that doesn't mean it is true. It doesn't mean it happened. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. It just means you had a thought, or a thought occurred to you. So I would say, allowing those thoughts to be there without kind of trying to figure out what they mean.
Not assigning any like different levels of meaning or like associating them with anything, just acknowledging the thought. Yeah. And I think we were saying it earlier too, that if your OCD is telling you don't go see your mom, do the exact opposite. Go see her. And that's, so hard, but seeing her, even with those anxious thoughts, doesn't mean that those thoughts are likely to come true, or any more likely to come true. Yeah. And sometimes we just have to be mindful that it doesn't become compulsive, that we feel the need to always confess. But sometimes even just chatting with someone about this. So even if it's your mom being like, hey, like, I'm really sorry I haven't been able to see you lately, or I've been canceling things, but this is what I'm dealing with right now, and it's really hard. And I find sometimes once you share, if you're comfortable and you feel supported enough to share that, sometimes sharing it helps too, because then the other person, sometimes they don't even realize what's happening. So they're not even sure of how they can help you, or they're unsure of why things might be happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was ashamed, guilt, and in denial of my OCD for years. Coming to terms that I have OCD and that I am not OCD really helped me seek help. Yeah, I love that, Jessica. It can definitely become our whole self, I think, sometimes. And it's I know I have fallen into that trap of kind of associating myself with OCD and thinking that is who I am, that is all I am. And that's, it is a part of us. And we can't change that, but it is not all of us. So I think that you coming to terms with that, sounds like you've made some really great progress already.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I'm excited for you. I don't know if seeking help is like currently or in the past, but I'm excited for you to get help and to keep learning more about yourself. I think that's something that I didn't really expect in therapy. Is I just learned so much more about who I am and what matters to me. So I'm excited for you.
Yeah. And I feel like therapy also really helps with like building your self-esteem and your confidence, because you're learning how to talk back to this thing that's constantly bullying you 24/7. So I think it really teaches us to give ourselves a lot more credit and more power than we do previously.
Yeah, and I think it shows us that we can do these things that we never thought we'd be able to do.
Yeah.
I love that. So is a good ERP response to any intrusive thought? Maybe. Yeah. I mean, as long as it doesn't become like a compulsive response. But yeah, I think if you have the thought, am I going to X, Y, and Z? The answer always can be, yeah, maybe not. We don't know.
Yeah. And I think an important part too to remember with saying maybe as a response to your thoughts is sitting with and accepting that uncertainty. So we're not just saying maybe and then hoping everything goes away. We're saying maybe because we genuinely don't know, or we're unsure. And even though that unsure answer makes us really anxious and it just makes us really uncomfortable, we're still going to be okay with those feelings, and we're going to let them sit.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, that the goal of ERP is not to disprove that the thing is going to happen. It is to accept that even if it does happen, we will be okay, and that we just don't know if it's going to happen.
Exactly. Yeah. We have no control over what can happen. We can't control things by different compulsions we do, or different thoughts that we have, or things that we say, right? So
yeah, I think I heard someone talk about recently that they, as much as their OCD tried to trick them into thinking they were, we are not wizards, and we cannot change things in that way. And I just think back to like the Matilda scene where she like is literally turning on the lamp and stuff. Like, we don't have that power. So it's, it is, again, we're kind of making light of it, but it's not something that we can control. So yeah, I think maybe is a really good response, as long as it's, again, accepting that we don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I suffer from, sorry, there we go. I suffer from harm OCD. What would be my best option?
Yeah, so we had mentioned this earlier, but no matter what the content of your themes are, or the the theme of your OCD, ERP is the best therapy out there for OCD. And you can reach out to NoCD. They have therapists. You guys are in the UK, US, and Australia.
And Canada.
Yeah,
and
some of Canada.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so like going on there and reaching out. And if you're like outside of those areas, I know the IOCDF website, there's like a list of providers, and it's like worldwide. So
yeah. And yeah, I would say, as much as you can, get into either support groups. If you're not able to go to therapy for any reason, there are support groups to just kind of talk through these kinds of things. Hearing other people's stories, listening to podcasts is also something that for me personally was really helpful was listening. The OCD Stories podcast is to this day changed my life, just in the interviews that he does, and hearing others' experiences with OCD, I think is really helpful in anyone's recovery.
Yeah, and it's really empowering too, because then you're not alone, but hearing other people share their stories, it's so nice to be, I don't know, like just doing something and then someone will say something on a podcast and you're like, oh my gosh, I think the exact same thing, where I do this exact same thing and I've never known anybody else to do this. So it's really nice to know that there's others out there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been hell of having thoughts of stabbing people, especially my loved ones. I know I don't want to do it, but not knowing is what kills me. Yeah, I mean, just described OCD, that you know who you are, you know what you want and what you value, and the not knowing part is the scary part. Yeah, and that's the hard part.
Yeah, and it's really hard sitting with those thoughts and embracing that uncertainty, but at the end of the day, no matter how much we think about something or ruminate about it, it's not going to change if something did or didn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see any other questions right now. So if you guys have any others, we do have a couple more minutes. And we had mentioned this earlier, but this is the last live that Anna and I are going to be doing for a while. They are trying to kind of cycle through other advocates who have other really great things to say as well. So it has been so fun doing these with you, answering these questions, getting to know you, getting to know other people. What's that?
Oh, I love doing them. And I think it's so great with how many, I know a lot of the people that ask questions, like that they come back every week and they're on like multiple lives a week, checking in and finding support and just listening to other people's stories, I think is amazing. And I give huge kudos to everyone who shows up, because it's really hard to just go into a chat box and type out thoughts that you're having or something that you're experiencing. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that these questions are always really like meaningful and deep. And I love them. And I love that there are so many people here with us each week. So if anybody else, if anyone else has any other questions, we have a couple more minutes. If not, we can log off a little bit early, I guess, if nobody has anything else to ask. We'll hang out for a second or two longer. But yeah, I just want to thank everyone, as always, for being here, for asking these questions. And it's so wild. I think I had mentioned this last week too, that doing these lives used to bring on so much anxiety. Yeah. And I remember like sweating and shaking and like my stomach would hurt, and it's just so wild that the more you practice it and the more you do it, not necessarily that I don't mean to say that I'm getting better. I just mean that the anxiety that it brings on is not anywhere near what it used to be.
It's not as loud. Yeah.
Yeah, which is awesome. Like it's living proof that exposures work and that doing the hard things work and that we can do the hard things. So I think this has personally been for my recovery. This has been really helpful. I don't want to speak for you, but just being able to do this is, I think, really big.
Yeah. And also having like zero control of what people say and what people ask. And so I'm like, this might sound weird, but like I do definitely get triggered a lot during lives, but it's great because that's also like, I have to put ERP to work myself and I have to show up and know that I have no control over what's really going to happen. So it's great. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. It's so, because it is so, everything is unplanned. Like we can't control anything that anyone asks. And I used to get really nervous that people would ask things that would just stump us, or that would be like inappropriate, or there was just no way to kind of move past it. And that is, something that can absolutely happen every time we do these. So it is, like you said, putting our tools to use.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I am so happy to do this. And I'm sure whoever is here next week will be awesome. So thank you guys all for being here. And I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday night.
Thanks, everyone.